Still got to get me one of those hats, Rob.
Yeah, these are the good ones.
All right, we are live. I'm going to record this to the cloud. And I can start. Should I start letting people in?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, cool. I am doing that now. Slack me if you need me. I'm here, or just call it out. I'm here.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Howdy to the early bunch. We've got about 2 minutes before we go live. Thank you guys all for being here. We're looking forward to getting into this training shortly. Um, You all will be on mute for this call, but you can communicate with us through the chat box throughout the call. We'll ask you to submit questions as they come to you. And we'll also be holding out time if I can't find a way to work your questions in naturally to the flow of things at the end of the call. But feel free to drop into the chat your name and where you're calling from. And if you want to, the office that you're going to be running for. I'll go ahead and drop in. I'm Rob calling from Maine. But feel free to chime in with where you all are tuning in from. Hey, Charles, welcome from Tennessee. I love Tennessee. I haven't been back in about a year or so, but our very first candidate to win as a goodparty.org candidate won a Metro Council race in Nashville, Tennessee. We got to do a lot of work on the ground there. I see Mike and Rick. Derek also coming from Maine. Derek was saying he's got to get one of these hats. Derek, if you're in Portland anytime soon, let me know because I actually have quite a few of these that I can hook you up with.
I might take a special trip down there, Rob, for hats.
Wonderful. Well, we'll be getting started very shortly, guys. Michael in Iowa, we see you. See Raymond, Art in New Jersey, Christina in Philly, Christian in Philly, Alan in San Diego. Uh, it's good to see everyone. I'm going to reiterate one more time before we get started. You guys can ask questions at any point throughout this training in this chat, and I will do my best to weave it into the presentation that we're doing today. If we don't get to it, there's also 15 minutes that we're going to hold out at the end of the call for question and answer, and you'll be able to bring up your questions there. But I want to go ahead and get us started. The session that we're doing today is building your campaign plan. So this is the outline, your campaign strategy. This is on setting goals and mapping your timeline. We're going to cover a lot over the course of this training, but you'll be able to walk away from this training knowing how to craft a winning campaign strategy that's tailored towards your race. You'll know how to set specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound campaign goals or SMART goals. And we'll talk through developing a timeline that aligns with the key milestones and deadlines for any campaign. The goal here is to be able to equip you with all the tools that you need to have a plan that you can stick to and a plan that will adjust as things adjust as they do on the campaign trail. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Derek, who is today's expert. Derek is a political associate at goodparty.org. And Derek, can you give us a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about what you do here at goodparty.org?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Rob. My name is Derek. I've been working on campaigns for going on, I think this is year 15 now, Rob. I've been working on campaigns. Feels a lot shorter than that some days, a lot longer than that other days. I have worked on campaigns from local referenda and bond issues all the way up to the presidential level. And now I am working with Good Party, helping our Good Party candidates who are running across the country, getting them the tool they need to win their election.
Awesome. Well, I'll go ahead and just let us dive right into things. We're going to start with talking about understanding just the basics of a campaign plan. So, Derek, I think a good place to start is what do you think of as the key components of a successful campaign plan?
Yeah, I think the sort of key components to a campaign plan. One is that it has clear objectives and goals, that it is both realistic and measurable. It's so Rob sort of mentioned this, but it's flexible enough to adapt to the evolving circumstances of a campaign, but also sort of rigid enough to provide the foundation and walls for your campaign. Uh, and it's structured and organized, and fairly comprehensive. It should cover just about all aspects of the campaign. When I think about building a campaign plan, I typically break a campaign plan down into five distinct parts. One for research that really analyzes the electorate, the voter demographics, the concerns, information about opponents and election laws. Uh, a big piece of your campaign plan will be your messaging plan, your voter outreach plan, your budget and fundraising plans, your communications and your content calendar. The campaign plan really is an all-encompassing document that sets you hopefully on the right path to win your election.
Awesome. And how can candidates tailor their plans to fit the unique dynamics of their race? Not every race is the same. If you're running for city council, it's different than running for a mayoral race, while there are some commonalities.
Yeah, there are a lot of things in campaigns, I think, where there's overlap, but at the end of the day, most of you know your community better than almost anybody else and have a much stronger understanding of the dynamics of your race than anybody else. A lot of your plans are going to be based on pretty simple math. The your path to victory, what the turnout is, what number you have to hit to win your election. But when it comes, I think especially to messaging, what issues are going to impact your neighbors, resonate with your target audience, the insights that you guys have as candidates and community members are some of the most valuable assets and insights in determining sort of how you communicate about your campaign. And also, you guys might have information on sort of local political dynamics that aren't immediately apparent to somebody like myself looking from 30,000 feet. But when we're projecting turnout, for instance, if you know that, hey, the last time around there was a very controversial bond issue that drew out a lot of voters, increased turnout, like those types of insights and perspectives can be extremely helpful when you're trying to figure out the math behind what it takes to win. So a lot of it's going to be coming from a little bit of a gut check and a little bit of your own sort of knowledge and background of your community, of the politics in your community.
I can already see in the chat some comments, relating to fundraising and to voter outreach, being able to reach voters. And really, I think fundraising, voter outreach, and ultimately messaging are some of the most important parts of a campaign plan. Can you talk about those kind of individual buckets and the way that they fit into the overall strategy?
Yeah. Fundraising, voter outreach, and messaging, I would say, are the core pillars of any campaign strategy. Your fundraising and budget. You should know what it's going to cost to run the high end version, the medium range, the shoestring version of your campaign. You should know how much it's going to cost to reach out to your voters, and be able to identify any sort of significant predictable expenses or deadlines, like you're planning to do some texting. It's good to plan that out and budget that in. Ultimately, your budget, your fundraising plan serves as the roadmap to keep your campaign cost effective and on track, and hopefully debt free when you come to election day with a good nice spend down. Voter outreach should pretty much cover all of the essential activities your team's going to undertake to reach educate, persuade, or mobilize voters for your campaign. This could be, laying out your canvassing schedule, your phone banking, peer-to-peer texting, robocall, your volunteer recruitment and management, among many, many other tasks and ways you'll reach out to voters. Typically, I'm going to say in a standard campaign plan, this is where you're going to lay out where your vote goal is, sort of lay out your path to victory, and more specifically, the plan to reach those voters to hit those numbers. And messaging, probably what I would consider the one of the most important pillars of a campaign plan, because I think almost everything else stems off your messaging. But your messaging is how you present your campaign and contrast yourself to your opponent. In your campaign plan, you should be working out what your motivation is, right? Why you're running for office, what your key issues are, meaning the main challenges or problems you intend to tackle, what your core values are, what principles and ideals you represent, impact on the voters. Why should the voters care about what you have to say, and your solutions to those issues that you identify, right? If you can answer these 5 questions, I feel it's very hard to be put in a situation where there's gotcha questions. If you have a strong understanding of what your values are and how to communicate with them, very hard to be caught sort of flat-footed and off guard. And it's going to be the way it'll be sort of the guiding light you come back to when you're trying to figure out how to respond to situations that may happen that are outside the plan, right? Those things that come up during the campaign. So I think it's very important to specifically spend time and resources and thought energy on fleshing out your messaging, fundraising, and voter contact strategies, because they're very important.
Yeah, some really good points there. So kind of repeating back a bit of what I'm hearing, fundraising, voter outreach, and messaging are some of the core parts of building out a campaign plan. I know that we're going to get into a demo of some of goodparty.org's tools that help you to do all of these things as we get further into the training today, particularly helping you to do things like calculate your vote goal and estimate voter turnout and use the voter file data that's available. But there are some questions in the chat that I want to point some attention towards. On the subject of fundraising, we've been asked, is there an easy way to set up a website that you can use for the campaign and link to collect donations using PayPal or a Stripe platform? And I know this is something that you as a political associate help a lot of our candidates to sort of navigate. So thoughts on the easiest way to set up collecting donations as an independent candidate?
Yeah. First off, I will say, as a disclaimer, before you start collecting any funds, make sure you are fully aware of what the rules, regulations are for collecting, reporting, contributions to your campaign. Very important. Election laws, that'll be part of the research section of your campaign plan. But yes, I definitely recommend setting up a web page for your campaign and having a page on your site that leads to donations. There are many different forms, fashions, functions, vendors, all right, people who process contributions for political candidates. If you are looking for specific recommendations, you should check in with your political associate. And then I'm sure all of us, I think, would be happy to run you through some of the ones that we've used in the past. But Stripe, PayPal, DonorBox is one that I'm familiar with myself. But there are many vendors out there to help with gathering of contributions. And you should definitely have it easily accessible on your webpage. People should be able to land on your homepage and figure out how to get involved, whether that's be volunteering or contributing to your campaign. That should be pretty apparent from within 3 seconds of them landing.
Awesome. And Derek, as we've mentioned many times already, there are unexpected shifts that happen over the course of a campaign. How do you build an adaptable campaign plan that helps you, come up against those unexpected challenges or even opportunities?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with planning, right? If you're gonna, at the beginning of the campaign, it's an exercise you should do while writing out your messaging strategy, but plan how you're going to respond to any critiques from your opponent, um, and highlight what sets your campaign and your message apart. Having these responses ready, I think, early on, can really help you sort of construct and maintain a consistent and effective narrative when you're addressing, comparisons from your opponent, challenges raised during the campaign, and going back to your core values and sort of guiding principles can help you know how to respond to opportunities if, let's say, there's a controversy that comes up about your, right? And so I think taking a little bit of planning, and I know it sounds a little counterintuitive, planning for the unplanned, but having not just pre-written sort of messages connected to your values, but also having somebody on your team who is, potentially delegated to be the person that brings this kind of stuff to your attention and is the person to respond to it. Having those types of systems in place, I think, can be really helpful for, especially responding to opportunities.
Yeah, I love the idea of trying to get ahead of what some of these perspective challenges might be. I'm a big fan of an exercise called the Tully message box, where you sort of on a grid ask yourself, how do we talk about ourselves? How do we think our opponents might talk about us? And sort of turn that on them as well. I think also having benchmarks worked in, and we're going to get into goal setting in a second here because that's such an important way of being able to break down like the big heady goals into achievable. Okay, I need to get this many voter contacts this month. But I do want to lift up a couple of things that are happening in the chat before we move on to SMART goals. One, I'm seeing some good sharing of resources. Josh represents a website builder called polyengine.com that he's used. And there's also a couple other recommendations around Stripe platforms and Square websites that people have used. So love the way that you guys are supporting each other on these questions there. I also see a question here that I think is a good one, which is just how do you find a campaign manager who can help you with writing these types of plans?
Yeah, ask. I've worked with a lot of candidates, probably hundreds of candidates over the last 15 years in some form or fashion. And I would say the number one impediment to finding a campaign manager, especially if you're going to be leaning on your personal support network and you're not interested in spending tens of thousands of dollars hiring a consultant, the biggest impediment I find is people aren't willing to ask. I think a lot of us, I'll say myself, right? This is something I know I have trouble with, where I assume somebody can't help, right? Oh, they're busy, they've got kids, they've got a lot going on, and I just assume they can't help. But at the end of the day, you're going to get no help if you don't. And so if you know somebody who is organized, they don't have to have necessarily direct experience working in politics, but if they are someone who is organized and someone who is focused, someone who has, a basic understanding of like project management principles, these are the types of people who are going to thrive in these types of campaign management roles. Someone who can act as essentially a facilitator and delegator and make sure that the train is on the tracks. But my number one piece of advice is ask the people who are already surrounding you and supporting you. It's the absolute best way to find people. In sort of the campaign speak, we typically call this putting together like a kitchen cabinet. And once you pull together that core group of folks, I think people will start to self-identify the skills and the interests that they have, and you'll be able to sort of plug folks into roles that are most effective and most helpful.
Yeah, and if I can offer sort of a shameless plug, a part of what goodparty.org sets out to do is to be able to offer some support, especially to candidates who might struggle to find a full-time professional campaign manager. Our tools do a lot of this work and make it a little bit easier for maybe a first-time campaign manager to have some of the best practices that are gate kept by the more seasoned industry types. I see a great comment here from Dr. Mike. He says, great points. Each of these pillars deserve their own talk or course. And certainly, I think if I know the curriculum for the rest of the year, we actually are going to do deeper dives than this 101 dive into each of these. But Mike asks a great question. In our experience, what is the approximate timeline to properly research your race, your community, and flesh out the details of a campaign plan for a municipal government race? So a citywide race. What is the planning phase? How far out from the actual election should that planning phase fall in your experience, Derek?
Yeah, I would say the planning phase, where you're pulling together a campaign plan, that's happening shortly after I'm going to say you make the decision to run. You should be looking at what it's going to take to actually do the thing, right? To actually run for office. I would say before having access to the Good Party tools, that putting together a campaign plan was like a several week project for folks who come on to a campaign. Realistically, with the way the tools are set up now, it's something that you can generate in an afternoon. I think it will take a little bit more time to digest it, but I would say once you've made the decision to run for office, you should start looking at this data and start thinking about what it's going to take to be effective in your campaign.
Awesome. Well, I want to move us back to talking about setting goals. What makes a SMART goal? What makes a good set of goals for a campaign plan?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know what a SMART goal is, SMART is an acronym that stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Really just a framework to think about how to set goals that are both meaningful and impactful. So an example I'm going to say of maybe a not SMART goal, right, is I want to increase turnout among the student, right? That's very vague. There's no way for me to really measure that. Where you could frame the same thing as I want to identify turnout 500 students to vote during the early vote phase of the campaign, between, we'll say, October and November, right? So it's very specific. We're going to identify and turn out voters, right? It's measurable, it's achievable, and most importantly, it's time bound. Everything we do on a campaign is time bound. All your goals should be time bound, because this is one of the few jobs that you have where there's a very hard end date, right? It's going to be election day and then the campaign is over. So it's really just a way to think about how can I put goals into this campaign plan that's going to make it easy for someone who were maybe coming into the campaign for the first time halfway through. Well, they'll understand immediately what the goals are, what the expectations are, and how to achieve them.
Excellent. And when it comes to setting both short-term and long-term goals, what do you think of as sort of the key principles?
I think it sort of depends on your general campaign strategy, but I think for me, my long-term goals are all sort of overarching and having to do with campaign victory. Winning the most amount of votes on election day. And typically how I'm setting my short-term goals is by taking those long-term goals, breaking them down into smaller milestones. I'm a very timeline-oriented person. And so for anybody who has access to my Google Calendar, I'm both sorry, but you can also see that it's like everything is tracked very clearly. And so I like to break things down into smaller goals, typically on either a 10-day or a 14-day sort of cycle for my short-term goals, and quarterly for my sort of medium and long-term.
Awesome. And do you have some examples of some impactful goals related to fundraising, as well as voter contact and media coverage? You name those as the three big buckets. I see a lot of chatter about fundraising and a lot of interest in fundraising, so I'm excited for the fundraising focused training that we'll do in a couple of weeks. But particularly around those three areas, what do you think of as effective or impactful goals or framework for goal setting?
Sure. So with fundraising, I think fundraising is an easier thing that goes around, especially if you have a very well thought out budget. Um, and there also tends to be very specific timelines for reporting. And so an effective goal I would see for, let's say, fundraising would be to, raise $2,000 from 100 supporters during the first reporting period, right? For voter contact, it might be contact or attempt to contact 2,500 voters during the awareness phase of the campaign, or contact 75% of identified supporters during the Get Out the Vote campaign or section of the campaign. For media, I see goals often built around uh, like placing letters to the editor from supporters, for press releases and endorsements and coverage. And so those I think are all good examples of goals for this bucket.
Yeah, I also love a good symbolic goal when it comes to things like fundraising. Derek and I both live in Maine, and we've worked on campaigns together in the past. And I know that there are roughly 500 different municipalities in Maine. So I always try to get one contribution from each of those municipalities, both because it's a powerful narrative tool and it's a good way to encourage people to be that one person who gives from that particular town, and helps to sort of build things up. So there are both goals that are tactical and goals that can be helpful in terms of breaking down the bigger piece. But when it comes to practical advice, what are some of your best practices, Derek, for setting stretch goals to really push your team and your campaign forward without overwhelming them? We always want to shoot for the moon so we land amongst the stars, but what's your best advice?
Yeah. So I spoke on this, breaking things down. I think dividing these larger stretch goals into smaller, manageable milestones, the incremental approach sort of allows your team to celebrate wins along the way, which I think is really important, and to sort of reduce the risk of feeling overwhelmed by these huge goals. I can tell you that when you're looking at it and I say you've got to contact 15,000 voters, that seems scary. When you figure, oh, that's 1,000 contacts a week for the next 15 weeks, that's a much more reasonable and manageable goal. The other big piece of advice is to engage and empower your supporters to help reach these stretch goals, right? Involve your team members, especially those you maybe are in your kitchen cabinet. Involve your team members in the goal setting process. I think they will be a very good gauge for what is realistic, and also when everybody sort of contributes to the goals and vision of the campaign, they've got skin in the game and they're more willing to sort of push up against that boundary of giving just a little bit more. And finally, I think prioritizing and focusing. If you're going to be setting stretch goals that you are you want to push a little bit harder, you have to make sure that you're pushing and prioritizing if you're setting stretch goals on getting out 500 more yard signs, I don't know if that's as impactful as going out and reaching 5,000 more voters, right? So make sure you're focusing and setting your stretch goals on things that matter. Empower some folks to have some skin in the game. Break it down so you can celebrate those wins when you're crossing those milestones.
Awesome. I see a great question here. I'd be curious to hear how goodparty.org's offerings and learnings of alternative new media strategies look. How can independents save money but still have effective outreach compared to old school partisan approaches? So to distill this down, Derek, what are some sort of new trends that you see that embrace alternative or new media strategies that can potentially save people money as they're putting together their campaign plan?
Yeah, so I think especially in the last, two or three cycles, there's been a fairly significant trend towards, I'm going to say less centralized and more uh, sort of digital based outreach for politics. One of the things I've seen on the rise quite a bit is um, the addition of things like smart TV ads and banner ads, social media advertising, both organic growth and paid growth through social media, um, that has significantly reduced the cost for you to get your message out to folks in your community. Um, Thinking about things like banner ads and smart TV ads, where most of these brokers who sell these kind of things allow you to set up geo fences so you can like set it directly to the borders of your town. So folks that are watching on their Roku TV or whatever are going to get your ads. It really, I think, has gone a long way from removing some of the centralized power that what traditional media market, you know, uh, ad brokers and news and TV channels have on the political race, and also just generally keeps the cost down. I don't know if you guys have looked at TV advertising or radio advertising during peak campaign season. It's absurd. And I think one of the things that we can do at Good Party to help keep those costs down is by providing the sort of tools and data and messaging help to create these without costing you tens of thousands of dollars. I think it's part of our core philosophy to make people matter more than money in politics. And a lot of what we do, I know I do in my role to uphold that, is making sure that things we're doing aren't costing you guys $1 million. It shouldn't cost anybody $100,000 to run for city council, right? And so I think there are plenty of ways to um, communicate with folks now where you can get a lot more uh, reach in far more cost-effective ways than traditional forms of voter outreach, like television advertising, direct mail, and things like that.
Yeah, I think if I were focusing in on a municipal level race myself, the main things that I would focus on to try to break through, one, I this might surprise some people, but I still believe in the impact of just good old-fashioned Facebook advertising. I have seen a lot of data coming out of the last cycle that, and especially in races at the municipal level, the people who could strike that right balance of spending strategically at a targeted level on their Facebook advertisements and meta advertisements, and there's a whole headache for getting approved to run those ads, that our folks on our political team can help you to navigate. If you can blend that with knocking every door in your district, it makes a huge impact. Like the number one thing I always tell people is to try to knock every door in your district at least once, if not twice or three times, because that you'll learn more doing that than you will do any other thing that you can do. But adding in that sort of digital layer is important. And then looking for the empty spaces as well. If you see that your opponent is not going out and having things like listening tours, that's a space that you can hold. Or if they're not entering the sort of podcast ecosystem that exists in your city, if there is one, if they're not reaching out to the groups that do endorsements, like looking for the space where you're going to be able to take up the whole space would be my suggestion on that one. One last question related to fundraising before we get into timeline. And this is, how do you find people specifically with fundraising skills to help you with your campaign? So similar to the campaign manager question, but how can you bring in fundraising expertise, especially during the planning phase?
Yeah, I would say if you have people who, and these are going to be very general here, are in the nonprofit sector. In my experience, folks who come from the nonprofit sector tend to have fairly strong fundraising backgrounds. Uh, if you're not, and this is the thing, and I think I might kick it back to you, Rob, just sort of the nature of our relationship and how we know each other. But I think people can be trained to fundraise. I think if you are a person or if you have people in your support network who are generally good at talking with people, right, and making asks, aren't afraid to make an ask, they can be a good fundraiser. Fundraising, like most of what happens on a campaign, is a honeable skill, right? It is something that you can work with your PA if you're looking for strategies on how to make scripts, on how to make more effective asks. It's a very specific skill set that you can work. But I know in my experience, when I've hired fundraisers or work with fundraisers, like people who come from a customer service background or like they work in a call center or something, anybody who has that type of experience of dealing with a lot of people um, in a friendly and positive way, I think they have the potential to be a good fundraiser. And Rob, do you want to speak on that? Because Rob kind of taught me how to fundraise back in the day. So
Yeah, I think that Derek and I met. We were doing a lot of work in Maine, particularly around marriage equality, and we had a team that was doing persuasion conversations, going out doing voter contact, and that we had a fairly large team that we had dedicated to doing that work on a daily basis. And in order to pay for that program, we ended up pulling a couple of the people from the field and training them to do fundraising as well. So these were not fundraising experts to start with, but we coached that same group of people to be able to go to folks who had given to the Equality Federation in the past, folks who had made contributions, and call them and ask them to give. The number one thing that I would say around fundraising is that you need to give a reason and a compelling reason that someone should give to you. In our case, we had a really easy sell where we could say, dollar for dollar, the money that we're raising on these phone calls is going to go towards continuing this really effective persuasion work that led to Maine becoming the first state to pass marriage equality through popular vote at the ballot in a year where 4 states did that. So for a candidate, you have a little bit of a harder job, but it's all about being able to sell the vision of, if you vote for me, here is the change that you'll also be endorsing. Here are the policies that I'll put into place. Here's how your life will be better. So you've got to be able to sell that vision piece. I would also say that there are treasurers that almost every campaign needs to hire, and those people are a good place to start as well. They're good with minding these facts and figures, and they can be the person in charge of a fundraising team eventually. So I hope that helps. Let's get into talking about mapping the campaign timeline. What are some of the critical milestones that you should include in a campaign timeline? There are some big pieces here, big buckets, as I often like to put it, that everyone should be aware of. What do you think, Derek?
first and foremost, any sort of deadlines relating to the election deadlines, reporting deadlines, filing deadlines, ballot access deadlines, anything where the state or board of election is going to provide you a deadline, that should be in there, and you should be either actioning around it or telling stories around it, right? Every deadline is an opportunity to tell a story about why you need more contributions. The end of the deadline, end of the campaign phase is always a reason to message around why people should get involved, right? So deadlines, super huge. Voter outreach phases, and this can be sort of different based on how you break up your campaign, but those transitions should be laid out fairly well. Holidays, it happens every year that candidates are sending out texts on holidays because they scheduled it 3 months in advance and aren't paying attention. So I think voter outreach phases, election deadlines, fundraising, reporting deadlines, holidays, and typically what I would also say are milestones for you to complete your goals. So like metrics-based milestones that should be included with your time.
Awesome. And how can candidates prioritize tasks and deadlines to avoid last minute crunches? Staying ahead of your calendar is such an important part of having a plan in general.
Yeah, this is I think we're having like an overarching campaign calendar can really help. Being able to map out and really visualize those deadlines and those clips can go a really long way to avoiding those last minute crunches to stay organized. Like I said, I also typically when I'm working on campaigns, I'm in a fairly hard 10 or 14 day cycle. And so within those cycles, there are, regularly scheduled check-ins to make sure that everybody on the team has a role in or has a part to play in accomplishing these goals, that everybody is sort of clear in what their role is, what the progress towards goal is as we march towards these deadlines. So it should be something that you're looking 10 days ahead. You shouldn't ever be caught off guard by a deadline that exists in your campaign.
Yeah. Finally, how can voter data and some of the tools from goodparty.org help you to refine a timeline over the period of your campaign?
Yeah, I think here at Good Party, I think goodparty.org, we've worked really hard to make this process as painless as possible by, essentially providing everything you need to generate an effective campaign plan quickly, accurately, and fairly easily. Like I said, it takes what used to be a weeks long process and really does distill it into just a few minutes, which, especially in the early stages of the campaign, can really give you an edge and help you launch your campaign as strongly as possible. So I think the full suite of tools to make a very comprehensive campaign plan, you can do that currently with the Good Party tool. I love it. It's honestly changed the way I run campaigns. It used to be such a pain. Now it's pretty straightforward. So
awesome. And I know that a question that John Rawlings asked at one point in the chat here was, at what point do you think is a good time for a candidate to switch over to Pro, where you're paying for that voter data? And I kind of answered in the chat that I think it's when you need that voter data. It's the one thing that for FEC rules that we can't really give away for free. But when you're getting into really targeting your voter contact, where that data can make the difference and help you to make tough decisions around, is this the right voter for me to be talking to? I think that's sort of the key moment. And that's going to be different. Some candidates, especially in smaller races where you can afford to literally talk to every single voter, knock on every single door, data becomes a little less important. But when you're in a larger jurisdiction or a place where you have to make the decision between, okay, is this the most important door for me to knock on, or is this the most important door for me to knock on? Data can help you to make that decision. If it's a race where you're looking to spend your ad spend for Facebook as effectively as possible, being able to look at some of the Facebook tools that we have available in the data as well, super helpful. So that's my take on that. Anything to add there, Derek, before we move into the demo portion of the evening?
yeah, it's my personal belief that you can't have too much data too early. I think as soon as you start looking at how to differentiate different types of voters is about the time that you're going to need access to that voter data to make effective decisions. There's only so much you can really do by looking up the historical election data. So get it early would be my advice, my shameless plug for upgrading to Pro. So.
Excellent. So let's talk about how to use goodparty.org's tools to be able to build out a plan like this. I want to introduce Tevin Bell. Tevin is one of the wizards who helps to build all of the really cool tools that we use at goodparty.org. Tevin, do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself and then walk us through how we can use some of our tools?
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm the senior product manager here at goodparty.org, which probably doesn't mean much to a lot of you. It's a very techie kind of title, but relatively simply, I study all the people that use our tools. So I talk to uh, over a dozen candidates every month, really focusing on what problems they're facing, where our tools are helpful, where our tools could be more helpful. And then a lot of my job revolves around making sure that we solve the right problems for you all. So you'll see likely over the course of your campaign some changes to our site, and a lot of those come from me and our design team. So yeah, I'm really excited to dig into how our tools really help you get your campaign plan together and help you be more informed, so that you can execute a successful campaign and really start to get people over onto your side and gather votes.
Awesome. So yeah, let's take a look at these tools in action.
Okay, I think Zoom is now happy with me. It was not happy with me there for a second. So the first big piece that we provide to you all is this voter contact goal. This is going to be pretty integral for kind of basing your strategy. You can see here I'm in a bit of a smaller district, so this will come into play in a couple ways here, but there are some adjustments you can make for larger districts, and I'll go over those as well. So this voter contact goal essentially says you should contact every voter that's likely to turn out 5 times. And here's really how we calculate that. We pull from a national voter data vendor that we use to get all of the registered voters in your district. We multiply that by the expected turnout. Here you can see in this district, it's 32% for the election that I've chosen, the race that I've got set up here. That gives us just over 800 expected voters. And in this particular election, I need just over 50% to win. This might change for you depending on if you're in a multi-seat race or how everything looks there. So that means I've got just over 400-ish votes to win. And if I contact each of those people about 5 times, we get to just over 2,000 voter contacts that I need to make. So this is going to be a really important and foundational piece of setting your campaign strategy. Depending on this number, depending on where you live and your budget and your team size, you'll want to reach this number one way or another. So
I'll jump in just for a little bit of context there, Tevin. These are considered sort of like the best practices to be able to convince a undecided voter to be able to vote for you. It's sort of the same thing as the marketing principle that you need to see messaging for a product 5 to 7 times before you actually buy it. The same bears out across most political science research. It takes about 5 touches or 5 pieces of campaign messaging to be able to break through with a voter.
Thanks, Rob. So the next thing we do is we give you a guideline for breaking that down by channel. So you can see here, I need to knock on about 630 doors, which sounds like a lot, but that's 50 doors a week over a 12-week campaign, which should be a couple hours of work 1 day a week. So starting to break these down, not only by this channel, but also by the time you have left until your election, and start to set weekly goals for yourself, like Derek was talking about, is going to be an important way to help you maintain momentum and really start to chip away at these goals, because these are for a whole campaign, and a campaign is a combination of a marathon and a sprint, but definitely the people who can run the marathon tend to do really well. You can see here also it breaks it down by text messages, phone calls if I want to make those. But these are really just starting points. If you live somewhere more rural, door knocking won't be your best avenue. If you live somewhere really dense, densely populated, door knocking will be a lot easier for you. So really start to adjust these to your specific race and your specific circumstances. And some of these depend on you having access to voter data. Unfortunately, the white pages aren't quite what they used to be. So if you want to start texting people or calling people, that's where like getting the voter data to be able to do those things really helps you formulate your strategy. Okay. And then how I'd currently plan this out, if I were running, would be in a shared campaign calendar, Google Calendar, an Outlook calendar, something like that. I'll tease a little bit later on something that our developers are currently working on to help make that more seamless and part of our tools. It's something that we realized last year that we really needed to start offering, so we've been working through it for a while. But I'll save that till the end. So another way that you can get to more crisply defining your strategy is by using our AI assistant. And you can ask it a variety of things, from just a general, help me create a campaign strategy and a campaign calendar. And you can start to work with it and have a conversation to help you more easily be able to define a really crisp strategy for yourself. And that goes all the way from the very general to how should I plan out my door knocking efforts, to things like even a little bit more platform based, like, given what you know about me, help me create a messaging strategy. So I've got some data in here, and you can see that for this account, I'm a local business owner. For an auditor office, and it can help you through conversations with it, really help you get to crisp stuff. It'll give you some general guidance, and you can go in there and ask it, hey, I lean more this way, I don't particularly like this one, and that can help you have less of the writer's block, which is, tends to be pretty prevalent when you're doing a lot of this stuff on your own and staring at a blank sheet of paper. It gives you a starting point and lets you react to things and kind of mold it in the way that you really want to be. Okay. And then a little bit on executing the plan. One of the things that we do have here is letting you log your progress over the course of your campaign, going in and logging that you've knocked doors. You can see here that I've logged that I've knocked some doors, that I had some events, that I sent some texts, and that starts to populate up here and really give you a good way to track your own progress, the same way that you'd use a step tracker for health or other things like that. It keeps you aware of where you're at and lets you adapt your strategy based on how easy or difficult things were. Let's say you're in a more rural area and you tried to go door knocking, but you had to drive 3 miles between all of the places. Half the people weren't home. You can see that that starts to look less effective in your progress, and you can sort of adjust and maybe start thinking about more texts, more digital advertising, things like that. And then I did say I would tease a little bit of what we've been working on in terms of campaign calendars. So this is something that is currently in development. Everything you're about to see is fake, and I wouldn't be a product manager if I didn't give all of the disclaimers. So here's what will be upcoming for a campaign calendar. So it's essentially a list of tasks that is arranged by due date, by the phase of the campaign, that lets you start to set and track more of these weekly goals and important deadlines. Things like when early voting starts, in case you want to be sending out mailers or a text for potential early voters. So coming here in the next few weeks, we'll have an early version of this up. And as you all see that, and as you start to use it, here's my shameless plug. Definitely do not be afraid of sending us feedback about what you see. We've got a little feedback button here on the right, and I read through all of those. So if you see something and you think, hey, it would be helpful if it could do this, or this particular piece of this feature isn't helpful, definitely send us some feedback. That all comes to me. And I'd love to be able to make some quick changes and start to mold this thing to something that's like really helpful to you all. So I think that ends my shameless plug.
I love it. I have a couple of questions that have popped up that I think are best pointed at you, Tevin.
Yeah, go for it.
One of the questions is, do any of goodparty.org's tools integrate with Nation Builder? And if so, can you elaborate how?
Yeah, so we don't integrate with Nation Builder. But again, we're always taking a look at that feedback button. And if we start to see an influx of people looking for us to integrate with Nation Builder, and we know that it's prevalent among all of you, that's something that we'll start to consider with higher priority. So not currently, but nothing's off the table in the long term. If it's something you're interested in or you think would help you out or future candidates out, definitely give us that piece of feedback and we will always consider it.
Awesome. And I see lots of people saying, positive things about the tools. I see Tim saying that he's going to upgrade to Pro. Paul
warms my heart.
Paul asks, what's a good software for texting? And I would be remiss if I didn't say that we offer industry-leading prices on texting with our partner Skill to Win for all pro candidates, which our political associates can help folks to set up. You can also set up texting campaigns directly from our tool.
Yeah, and here's the button. One of the first ones on the page. We've got a little process here where you can go through it. That all comes to us, and then we work with Skill to Win to make sure that gets set up. Specifically because texting for political campaigns has some more niche compliance rules that can get pretty confusing if you're doing it on your own.
Awesome. Tevin, is there anything else that you'd like to add or show these folks before Derek and I go back into talking about how to have a team review these plans?
Yeah. I'd love to show them every part of the platform, but I think in terms of planning, I think we've hit all the highlights that we needed to.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tevin. And folks, we'll move into talking about how to work on this plan with your team, and then we'll pivot into the final question and answer push of this. But Derek, you've got a great plan. You've used all of the tools that Tevin built. How do you sort of pressure test these plans and refine them with your team, and who should you show your plan to, especially early on in the campaign? Oh, you're on mute.
Here we go. My Zoom etiquette over here. Put myself on mute when I'm not talking. Thank you, Rob. So I think candidates, I sort of touched on this earlier, but the people who are, again, what I'm going to call part of your kitchen cabinet, right? Those folks who are standing alongside you, supporting you, encouraging you, are extremely, extremely important. And their input, I think, is invaluable, especially if they are willing to give you unvarnished feedback. I think it'll be invaluable as you continue on your journey running for office. Involving team members, I think, like I said, can give them skin in the game, make them feel like they have ownership for the parts of the campaign they're helping out with. And ultimately, the more people you're bringing in, I think the more you empower them to use their skills and expertise, the stronger your campaign and your perspective will be. In terms of who exactly to share it with, My general go-to when I'm thinking, especially about messaging and putting together that kind of stuff, I've got two people who know me well, and one person who is not plugged into politics. My normal person barometer is what I call them to run messaging off to see what is resonating. But ultimately, the type of people you should share it with are the people you trust, because the people that trust and the people that support you should know what the plan is. That's very important, that everybody is clear on sort of what the expectations and the.
Awesome. Do you have any tips for delegating tasks and ensuring accountability within your campaign structure? So you've got this plan, you've got your team. What's the best way to make this plan a reality and to get help so you're not doing everything yourself?
Yeah, I'm a big kitchen cabinet meeting guy. Like I said, I like the nice 10 to 14 day cadence where you're sitting down with your team and maybe some asynchronous check-ins between there. But I mean, honestly, I think that the first role you should be filling on your campaign is finding a delegator. It shouldn't be the candidate. Most of what you guys are going to be doing, the most impactful work you're going to be doing is out there talking to voters and engaging with your community. So finding somebody who can help you manage the delegation of tasks, I think is very important. They should essentially become your right hand as you're moving through the process. Ideally, a candidate setting the vision and a supporter, a campaign manager in whatever capacity that is, should be driving, I think, the day to day of making sure these tasks are carried out.
Awesome. We are going to open it up for Q&A for the remainder of the call before we get into sort of the final wrap up. We'll hang out and answer questions for as long as there are questions to answer. You can drop your questions in the chat the same way that you have been doing all call. This hour went by really fast, and we're looking forward to doing some more questions and answers with all of you. Starting with Derek, this is one that I know is near and dear to your heart. What are your tips for planning door knocking?
Tips for planning door knocking. For the little extensive background, for most of the last 15 years of working in politics, I've been designing and executing fairly large scale door-to-door programs. So I've got tips for days on how to run effective door-to-door programs. In terms of planning, I think a couple of best practices to keep in mind. One, find out what your pace is on doors so that you can accurately predict how long and how many shifts you're going to need to complete to get through all of the doors you need to get through. I'm going to say industry average in a relatively dense community is you're looking at 15, 16 doors knocked on an hour, maybe 2 or 3 conversations an hour, right? So if you're hitting that pace, you should be good. 2, plan your route before you start knocking doors. Look at the map, figure out exactly how you're going to walk it. Hopefully in a way that you end up back where you started, right? Personally, I walk all turfs like a fun house, meaning I go all around the outside and then come back around, right? Don't spend a lot of time crossing the street. I can get into a ton of best practices. If you're signed up for Pro, check in with your PA. I know we've got plenty of resources on how to make your canvassing more time effective, how to maximize your contacts while you're out there. But plan before you go out there. And when you're talking to voters, this is my biggest piece of advice: make eye contact and listen to what they're saying. A good conversation at the door. As a candidate, the voters talking 75% of the time, and you're talking 25% of the time, right? These are door-to-door canvassing really is an exercise in empathy and active listening.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I love AI. I am someone who doesn't have the best memory, even around stuff that I've been doing for close to 20 years. And I was able to ask our AI just really quickly for some benchmarks around door knocking planning. And I'm going to drop those into the chat here because these are back of napkin benchmarks that you can use to be able to build out your plan that the AI was able to spit up for me. And I can tell by Derek nodding his head, they passed mustard with him as well. So another kind of plug for the tool in action here.
Yeah, that's great. I've never actually asked it to lay out the door knocking plan like this, and this I could have written this. This is exceptional. So yeah.
There was a question from Kiwana that I see Tevin answered in the chat that maybe Tevin, you could share your answer. This is sort of like VAN, the voter activation network, but with AI. Tevin, do you mind sharing your answer with that for the whole call?
Yeah, not at all. So we've all got the same end goal, which is to help people get elected and run effective campaigns. So you'll find that there will be a pretty large overlap in features. But as we're continuing to learn more about what's successful, especially for independents, and what differentiates our candidates from the candidates that VAN is really for, I expect them to diverge in the future, but you'll find that a lot of things will be similar, providing voter data and ways to conduct outreach.
Perfect. I see another canvassing-based question from Brian. Can we stand outside of Walmart, etc.? I've seen people looking for petition signatures there. When it comes to those spaces, there can be a little bit of a push and pull. Derek, I'm sure you can quote the specific Supreme Court ruling on canvassing in public spaces, but it really comes down to whether or not these places are private or public property in most instances. But for the most part, yes, I would say that you can canvass in these places. They're considered sort of the modern town square. And while the management might challenge you on that in some of these instances, almost certainly you kind of have to decide whether or not it's worth getting into the back and forth of it. It can be a useful place. I tend, though, to think of places where you know that the people are going to be registered voters. If you're going to be doing that sort of canvassing where people are coming to you versus going to a targeted door. So as funny as it sounds, rather than go to a Walmart, I might go to the dump in my town. I might go to the town office in my town and talk to people as they are registering their vehicles or as they are registering to vote even. Any takes on or tips for canvassing or planning canvassing in public spaces, Derek?
Yeah. Yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful when you're dealing with private property. Try to get permission if you can. One of the places I like to go that I've had a lot of success, specifically around like ballot access petitions and things like that. The public sidewalk outside the post office tends to have a lot of foot traffic depending on where you're at. Things like farmers markets, events, are really good places where you can get a lot of people together at once to sign your petition. But honestly, the most effective way I found to collect signatures is to go off the registered voter list. Everybody's registered to vote. They're likely eligible to sign your petition depending on what the ballot access rules are in your community or your jurisdiction. Yeah, be careful at the Walmart. And I'm going to double click on Rob. Like in my part of the world, the dump is where you're going to get the most amount of people from town. So.
Yeah, and there's another question here about canvassing in neighborhoods that have no soliciting signs. Canvassing and soliciting are two different things. Canvassing is engaging with people in a non-commercial sense. So it's typically informational. It is an expression of your free speech. Whereas soliciting is commercial in nature, or it could be fundraising. So if you are getting out the vote, if you are just talking to them and asking for their vote, that's canvassing, and that is protected by the First Amendment, and you can do that pretty much anywhere. And you have the right to walk up and knock on that door. they also have the right to tell you that they don't want to talk to you, and you need to be respectful and friendly if that is the instance. But when it comes to no soliciting signs, for the most part, I've always ignored those if I'm knocking doors for a political purpose. I would not fundraise at a door that had a no soliciting sign. Great questions, and please keep them coming.
I see one here in the chat. Do you leave any info with the voters when door knocking? Yes, absolutely. I see most candidates, they order sometimes got palm cards, wrap cards, leave behinds, campaign lit. Typically something that's going to show that you went to their door, you knocked on it. One thing that I recommend to all my candidates who are doing their own canvassing is to buy yourself a couple of post-it notepads and write a small message. Hey, sorry I missed you. If you want to get in touch with me, here's my email, my phone number, whatever. Attach that to the piece of campaign lit that you leave on the door. It's crazy how many folks will just send you a text or shoot you an email, and it gives you a chance to connect with those voters, even if you knock on their door and they're not home. So absolutely leave stuff with the voters when you're going out knocking on doors.
Awesome. I always make a note of this when we talk about literature because it is important. Legally, you cannot leave behind any literature in a mailbox. Only posted mail can be mailed. So political mailers are oftentimes a place where people can get hung up and fined by taking that piece that is meant to be left at the door on the door hanger or handed directly to somebody good-natured. You want the person to find it, you stick it in the mailbox. If it doesn't have paid postage on it, you can be fined for that. So make sure that you don't get dinged with that.
Oh yeah, seeing over here in the chat, you can get prosecuted by the post. So yeah, the fine's significant, and it's also the fine's per piece, right?
Yeah,
so
per piece.
You go run, you hit 50 in a neighborhood, you're going to be saddled with quite a fine. In most places, you can put it in the news box. My preference is to roll it up and stick it in the doorknob, and to not touch anybody's mailbox or news box or anything like that, just to make sure.
Well, seeing that the questions are beginning to slow and that we're approaching the end of the scheduled time, I want to thank everyone for being here and being a part of this training. In a moment, my colleague Quinn is going to have a pop-up come where you can let us know sort of some feedback on the training itself. Please fill that out. It helps us to fine-tune the offerings that we put together for all of you. Also, we'd love to stay in touch. I know many of you are already a part of our Discord, and we would love to see all of you in our online community so we can continue to have conversation with you. You can support each other one-on-one as well as sort of get group feedback. We have another training in 2 weeks, which is focused on building your campaign team. There are a lot of questions about how do you find a campaign manager? How do you find people who can help you with fundraising? We're going to really zero in on that topic 2 weeks from now. So bookmark it. That will be on the 20th of February, building your campaign team. And we will also show you the ways that your campaign team can work with our tools. So thank you all. I really appreciate you being here. We look forward to talking with all of you more. See you in the Discord. We also have a longer survey. We will email all of you a recording of this call as well as some additional information. But this has been a